It's Mr. Benson here. I'm putting together some videos which are the solutions to the measurement CAT. Now, as I said in class, if any of you want to have another go at this to improve your grade, I'm really happy for you to do that, but it's something you're going to need to work on outside of class time. So a few things that I'd like you to think about. As with all tests, one of the things you've really got to do to start with is make sure you're actually reading the question properly. So one error that happened quite a lot is that questions would ask about area, for example, and people would calculate the perimeter. So make sure that you're actually doing that. Now, one thing that possibly hasn't been explained to you well, but and so kind of my apologies if this was a bit of confusion for you, but when you are answering a test like this, if you want to achieve a certain level, you've really got to be achieving all the parts of that level. Now, you don't need really to answer all the questions on the test. So if you think about this test, it's structured in a way where we've got like level 7 stuff, followed by level 8 stuff, followed by level 9 stuff. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. Now, in order to get level 7, you've got to answer the understanding and fluency type questions and the reasoning and problem solving type questions. Now, you don't need to get them all, but you do need to get a reasonable number of them. And so I've got this little guide here. You need 3 of the first type and 2 of the second type. Now, if you were going to get a year 9 level, then you could just answer the year 9 part. That's fine if you're really good at it. If you'd answered it and you'd got, all of these right and all of these right, I'm instantly going to put you at level 9. Now, I don't suggest that you just do that. I would suggest that you actually try and answer more questions than that as sort of a bit of a backup. So you've got to make sure that you are doing both these parts, because what happened quite a lot with this test is a lot of you had these marks, so you had the level 7 stuff, but then you really only had some marks from the understanding and fluency part of the later part, so you weren't showing me that you could answer the more sophisticated questions, and that's why a lot of you have ended up with a mark down in the level 7 area. So maybe this is not, the best representation of your actual ability, but I do have to go back to what I said in class today, that I do see a lot of people not really working that much in class, and so you're not getting enough practice to really master these things and become confident with them. So yeah, my 3 points really on this bit are, you want to make sure that you're reading the question properly, so you're not getting mixed up with concepts like area versus perimeter. You've got to cover all the areas to achieve a certain level. Now, don't feel that you have to start the need to start at question 1, and this actually is good advice for any exam. Don't just start at the beginning and kind of blindly work your way through from the beginning till the end. Look for things on the test that you feel confident at and do those things first. You want to pick up all the marks for things that you find easy first and then spend time on the harder things. There's not much worse when you're doing an exam than starting off with something hard where you immediately get stuck on it and you also get kind of depressed about it as well, because then as soon as you go into anything else, it will always seem more challenging than it really is. Okay, so getting on to the questions, the first one was just about unit conversion. Now, this is stuff that well, how do I feel about this? To be honest, I think that it's stuff that could well be, in your bound reference, or it could be stuff that, even better, that because I do think that, unit conversions is one of those sort of everyday skills almost that's worth having. Okay, so we've got to convert from meters to kilometers, centimeters, and millimeters. Now, there's 1,000 meters in a kilometer, so we are dividing our number by 1,000 to get the first answer. So just on your calculator, 23.75 divided by 1,000, and what we get there is 0.0 0.02375 kilometers. Now, the other thing to think about here is if we're dividing by 1,000, we're just shifting our decimal point to the left. So we've moved our decimal point 1, 2, 3 places from where it was to end up at this place here. Okay, to going from meters to centimeters, well, there's 100 centimeters in a meter, so we're multiplying by 100, or moving our decimal place 2 to the right. So we've got 2375 centimeters. For the last one, there's two ways you can think about it. One of them is there's 1,000 millimeters in a meter, so you multiply the original value by 1,000, or you multiply our answer for centimeters by 10, so 23750 millimeters. Okay, next question, finding the area of a rectangle below. Now, you've just got to remember that we are talking about area here, and area of a rectangle is just the base multiplied by the height. So all we've got to do is multiply these two values that we're given, so 17 times 25, and so you know that calculation in itself is fairly easy. We end up with 425. Now, I was happy if people got that right, but really, you know, we're also looking for a unit as well. Now, the unit for area is going to be the centimeter squared. So not everyone got that right, and I was kind of lenient on that one, but it's important that you recognize that the units for area are always squared and the units for volume are always cubed. Okay, so here we go, finding the volume. So the only thing that's a little bit tricky with this one is that I've given one of the quantities in centimeters, so you either need to convert that to millimeters, which is fine, or you need to convert all of them to centimeters. Either way is fine. Now, if I've done it in millimeters, so volume is just length times width times height for a rectangular prism, and so I'm just multiplying my numbers together, so 20 by 6 by 12, and so we end up with 1440. Now the unit there is the millimeter cubed. Now there are 1,000 cubic millimeters in 1 cubic centimeter. So if you'd done your answer in centimeters, you should have ended up with 1.44 centimeters cubed. Whoops, I missed my milli up there. So the main error with this one was just not getting the units right, so leaving one of the quantities in the wrong unit, and so you ended up with the wrong answer. Okay, find the perimeter of the triangle below in centimeters. Now, this was relatively well done, because the first thing you've got to recognize is what these symbols mean. These are telling us that it is the same side length, so we've got 25 on both sides there, and this is 37 centimeters, so we've got to make sure that our units are all the same, and then the perimeter is just the sum of those numbers, so 25 plus 25 plus 37, and we end up with 87 centimeters, or 870 millimeters if you wanted to use those units are, except that's not what I was looking for. So this is one question where it said what the unit needed to be. So if you ever get a test or exam which specifies a unit, and that's not uncommon in VCE, maths and physics and stuff, make sure you use that unit. Okay, now this one threw people a little bit, because what you've got to think about here is that the area of a triangle is half of the base multiplied by the height. Now, this is when, if I draw a dodgy triangle here, so this is the base, and the height is always that line there that is at right angles to the base. Now, if we look at this triangle over here, okay, it's a weird looking triangle because the height is actually this value over here. So even though the height of it actually is not fitting in the triangle, it is still the height that, you know, is perpendicular to the base value here. So all you've got to do is substitute the two numbers in that you're given, but it throws people a little bit because it looks different. So you've always got to think that the definition of height is what I've drawn in my little triangle over here, where the height is the perpendicular height that's perpendicular to the base. Okay, so we've got half of 4.8 times 5.2. You know, these are the sorts of things that you always need to be doing on your calculator, because it's just a pain trying to work those sorts of numbers out any other way. We end up with 12.48. And that is centimeters squared. Actually, the other error that happened fairly frequently with this one is just people forgot this. So they knew that it was base times height, but you're forgetting that for a triangle it's only half. Okay, find the perimeter of the figure below. This was pretty well done, but to be honest, people probably did this a harder way than was necessary. So what lots of people did is they realized that, okay, so we've got 42 centimeters down here, but it must be the same width across the top. So if there's 19 millimeters there across the top, then what we've got here is 23 millimeters. And then same reasoning up the side, so it's 35 millimeters up this side, so it's 21 millimeters up the side so far, so it must be 14 millimeters there. And then you added them up and you got the right answer. Now there's actually kind of a bit of a trick with this one. What you got to recognize is that it's the same height here, if I kind of draw up that side, and then go across there and make just a rectangle. Well, it's actually the same distance all the way across here, which is 42, and it's the same height all the way up this side here, which is 35. So even though we've got a rectangle with this kind of chunk cut out of it here, as long as that chunk is, you know, just also in the shape of a rectangle, the perimeter of the whole shape doesn't actually change. So either way you did it was fine. You could add up all the numbers around the sides, so the 42, 35, 19, 14, 23, and 21, or you could just also recognize that the perimeter was going to be 2 times 42 plus 2 times 35, which is 154 millimeters. But again, we want the answer in centimeters, so this is 15.4 centimeters. Okay, now this one threw people a little bit. Now it's a relatively straightforward reasoning question, but it was really this last bit that got people. The third block is 3/4 the height of the second block. Okay, so what do we know? Now, often in questions like these, diagrams and stuff are worth thinking about. So I'm going to scribble on the diagram over here in a different color. So first thing we know is the first block is 10 centimeters high, so that's easy. Second thing, we know that the second block is half the height of the first block. So, well, that's easy because half of 10 is just 5. The third block is 3/4 of the height of the second block. So what do we mean by that? Well, the second block is 5. Now, if we've got 3/4 of it, then what we're doing is we're saying 3/4 times 5. And we probably want this as a decimal, so do that on your calculator, and what you end up with is 3.75 centimeters. So this sort of language shouldn't, you know, really be that difficult. You've got to remember that pretty much anything we were saying some fraction, so, you know, 3/4 of is kind of the word, so some fraction of something is always the fraction multiplied by the thing. Okay, so we end up with 3.75. Now, when you've got a cube, basically it's a kind of rectangular prism. Now, for a rectangular prism, we know that, you know, the volume is the length of times the width times the height. Now, for a cube, the length and the width and the height are all the same. So the volume of a cube is just the length cubed. So all we've got to do in this case here is we've just got to cube these lengths for each of the blocks and then add them all together. So our total volume is just going to be 10 cubed for the bottom block plus 5 cubed for the next block plus 3.75 cubed for the top block. Plug that into my calculator and I get Sorry, I left my answers at home, so I've got to work out everything out again, which is a wee bit tedious. So what I get with this one is 1177, I'm just going to go 0.7 centimeters cubed. Okay, last one for the level 7 stuff. Now, one thing that some people did with this, which I was really happy with, is they drew a diagram. So we've got a rectangle which has a width of 14. So we've got 14 and 14, and we've got the length and the length, and we know that the perimeter is 120 centimeters. I should write centimeters there for those as well. Now, so there's a couple of ways you can think about it, but basically they all end up as the same thing. So we know that the perimeter is the sum of all the side lengths. So what we know is that 14 plus L plus L equals 120. So we're saying that all the side lengths here equal the perimeter here that we've been given in the question. And then it's just a case of doing some really simple algebra to figure out what's going on here. So we've got 14 plus 14 is 28. L plus L is 2L. That all equals 120. So I'm going to take 28 off both sides. I'm going to end up with 2L equals 120 minus 28. 2L therefore equals 92. And so L is going to equal 92 over 2, which equals 46 centimeters. All right, so those are all the answers for the level 7 questions. Now, like I said earlier, these were relatively well done. I'll work on the level 8 ones and upload those pretty soon, and following with the level 9 ones. And yeah, please have a look through these questions, look at your CAT, see if you can identify some of the mistakes that you've made, or just, you know, whether you need to practice certain things to get more confident at them.